Welcome, believers. Welcome, conspiracy theorists. Welcome to the wonderfully weird world of the Tinfoil Hat Fan Club, where we talk about all the batshit crazy stuff that goes on in the world, and there is loads. Right, so last week we spoke about cattle mutilation in the UK. Now we turn our gaze to the United States. As always, I'll get this information from a website called UFO Insight. Check it out. It's a really, really cool website, all right? For a little bit of a fee of money, check it out, right? So, the abundance of cases throughout North America. As we have seen, then, while cases of cattle mutilation occur outside of the North American continent, there is no doubt that this particular part of the world experiences more than its fair share of such cases. What's kind of scary, isn't it? Cattle mutilation is scary. And while these mutilations take place all over the North America continent, certain hotspot areas in the United States see an unusually high number of such cases. Why? All right. Such states as Colorado, for example, or Arizona. What is perhaps interesting is both of the locations is an extremely active area of UFO sightings and encounters, right? Might the two be linked? It's certainly the belief of some researchers that there are Colorado, a long-time hotspot for cattle mutilation. So what do you think? It is perhaps appropriate that we start with the seemingly regular cases of cattle mutilation cases that come out of Colorado, which, as we have examined briefly before, is a seemingly discreetly important part of the United States, not only in terms of cattle mutilation, but of other mysterious activities, such as UFOs and even Bigfoot sightings. Indeed, some researchers point to Colorado as being the all-important state in terms of unlocking the secret to such mysteries, all right? So Colorado is full of mysteries. It could be because it's isolated, isn't it, really? I mean, we don't understand that as British, but Colorado is massive, right? Although cases of cattle mutilation in the Centennial State date back to the late 1960s, with a wave of such incidents unfolding in the 1970s, since the end of the 20th century, regular incidents have occurred there, right? And it is perhaps worth our time examining the Manuel Sanchez case from late 2009, right? At the time that he spoke with the Denver Post in December of that year, he had just discovered the fourth calf, seemingly killed during the night by unknown assailants on his ranch. So look, whether you believe they're CIA, FBI or aliens, this is still kind of scary, isn't it, right? All of them had the same precise injuries, their tongues and udders surgically removed, the skin from the face peeled completely away, as well as their eyes removed. What's more, there was never any blood anywhere around the mutilated bodies. All right, so I'm just going to pause this for a minute, right? Nor any tracks revealing who might have been there and carried out the attack. That is exactly the same as the Welsh incidents and the UK incidents, isn't it? What is it with their faces being removed? I mean, it chills you to the bone, doesn't it? Right, so if it is FBI, CIA, government, why are they doing it? You know, either case, whether it's UFOs or the government, it's scary stuff, all right? So, Sanchez, who had spent decades on such ranches, felt sure that the attacks were not down to lions, coyotes, who tend to drag their kills and rip and tear flesh. Respectively, he could claim that they were perfect cuts, as if they had been carried out by laser or a scalpel. He would continue that whoever carried out the attack left no tracks, no blood, no nothing. They don't leave no trace. Now, animals don't do that, do they, right? Governments do, I'm sure they do, but animals don't, all right? A little over a half a year earlier in the Trinidad region of Colorado, another rancher, Tom Miller, discovered one of his cattle in similar grim circumstances. Now, when Miller arrived to feed his cattle on the morning of March 2009, he found his herd raising all kinds of devil and extremely disturbed. Then, however, as he approached the feeding area, he could see the dead calf by one of the troughs. He would recall how the front legs and the torso had been completely removed, leaving a meatless backbone that connected to its hide. Now, by the time he had turned his attention to the unfortunate animal's face, he could see how the ears had been completely sliced off using surgical precision. When he looked around the calf, he could see that not only were there no tracks to suggest who might have carried out the attack, scary stuff, isn't it, right? Scary stuff. But there was no blood anywhere on the ground either. It's that blood thing that freaks me out, right? Where does the blood go? Although Miller didn't make any suggestion as to who or what might have attacked the animal, he was certain it wasn't a natural predator and had to, at the very least, be the work of a medically knowledgeable humans. Now, the grim discovery above is just one of many that Miller has been making on his land since 1999. And as we covered briefly last week, the UK ones, there is suggestion, right, that this has been going on since 1606. All right, and we have cases of in the 1800s and 1900s. So it's not a new phenomena, all right, but it is a scary one. Okay, so look, one researcher who has documented many of this is Kit Medster, who has discovered dead cattle on her land at the Flying M Ranch for many years. And the injuries were very much in line with the other cases we have examined here. Internal organs were often cleanly removed, as were sexual organs. Furthermore, on most occasions, part of the face were removed to the bones, and the blood was seemingly emptied completely. All right, so there is a pattern forming here, isn't there? No matter what mutilation happens, the blood's always disappeared, right? And organs are surgically removed. Now, one of the things that Medster has noted during her time experiencing these mutilations, which date back for her to the late 1970s, is that they often occur in waves from June to October, and this is often the case in other locations. She also notes that the Easter holiday, for some unknown reason, also often sees increased cases of cattle mutilation. So Metzer has also suggested that whoever is behind the cattle attacks, they most likely use some kind of muscle relaxant in order to carry out the draining of blood and other procedures. Now, this would essentially paralyse the animal. And that is the same, right? So, if we go back to what we was talking about last week, there were cases where there was a weird element found in the animals. Not an element that you normally find in there. So maybe that weird chemical element is to paralyse the animals. But it's still scary stuff, isn't it, right? So, the Manuel Gomez case. In the FBI document that we mentioned earlier last week, there contains the case of a mutilated bull of Manuel Gomez, who in 1978 discovered the dead animal on his land in Dulce, New Mexico. Now, anyone who follows my channel knows that I speak about Dulce. Apparently, there's an alien base there, right? Gomez would discover the animal with precise cuts to remove tissue and genitals, essentially almost identical injuries to many of the cattle mutilation cases of the decade. However, upon examination, police officer Gabriel Valdez, Gomez's bull, was found to have a heart and liver that were now white and mushy. Again, right, mushy appeared before, didn't it, last week? So I don't know what that means exactly, because obviously I'm not a doctor, but mushy doesn't sound good, does it? And he says it had the consistency of peanut butter. So, Dulce, New Mexico, and a mutilated bull, right? Now, further testing revealed extremely high levels of zinc, phosphorus, and potassium, as well as no copper whatsoever. Those who examined the liver were not able to explain these results. So obviously, that's strange. Further examinations will reveal that the body of the animal was weaker than would be expected for a death that occurred only hours earlier, while the blood that was left did not clot. Now, general tissue damage and discoloration was also discovered. So this poor animal, whatever happened to it, wasn't good, was it, right? Now, while it was speculation that was later officially dismissed, initial thoughts of investigators and scientists involved in the examination leaned towards the death of the animal being caused by a concentrated wave of radiation. Now, that's something to think about, isn't it, right? This is a detail that would also sit comfortably with many close proximity UFO sightings, which often feature claims of increased radiation. And that's very true, isn't it? Okay, that is very true. Now, there are many causes of radiation with UFO witnesses. Of course, we should perhaps also mention that Dulce is another location that is surrounded in mystery and conspiracy, including an increased UFO presence and top secret government activities. Coincidence? I don't think so, personally, right? So there you go. Dulce, New Mexico. Vancouver's bizarre and unnerving summer of mutilations, right? During the summer of 1990 in Vancouver, Washington, local farmers and residents would experience an entire summer of bizarre activity and cattle mutilations. One of the farmers most affected was Richard Fazio, who would discover 5 of his cattle dead and mutilated between June and October of that year. Each time they had injuries that an Oregon State University would conclude were identical to an electrical surgical excision or a laser type, heat-induced injuries basically. Even more chilling, these unfortunate animals were found with eyes, tongues, and even internal organs cleanly removed. So much so that it was extremely unlikely that a predatory animal were the culprits. Again, the same everywhere else, isn't it? Surgically removed. Animals tend to tear, hunger, aggression. There were also intriguing reports from Fazio's neighbour of a strange sound that could be heard at seemingly random times during the time of the cattle mutilation. Now, perhaps strangest of all was a report from a local woman who claimed to see a little man who was running through a field along the roadside and who appeared to be carrying something akin to a flashlight. A tiny little man. Do you think that was a grey? We don't know, do we, right? So these details would perhaps suggest an extraterrestrial involvement, at least as far as the Vancouver mutilation of 1990 go. However, of course, not everyone is as convinced. And I can understand that because it's a scary thing, isn't it? Veteran paranormal researcher, a bloke called Christopher O'Brien, who has carried out extensive research in cattle mutilation that can be appreciated in the book Stalking the Herd, and I'll stick it up there, Unraveling the Cattle Mutilation Mystery, would comment to Oregon Live that cattle mutilation were more complicated than aliens. While he would offer that 1 in 10 of such cases might have suggestions of extraterrestrial involvement, although generally there is very little evidence to support that. Well, of course there is. There's never any evidence, is there? Right? It is O'Brien's fault that a covert environmental monitoring process might be involved that was connected to a shadow type government using advanced technology. I'm not going to dismiss that. He would go on to describe as possibly being the greatest unsolved serial crime spree in history, and that there could be multiple groups involved, because there would have to be, wouldn't there? There is so many mutilation things happening that there couldn't be just one gang. Now, we should perhaps remind ourselves of the strange incident that occurred just short of a decade later in February 1999, when several forest workers witnessed a saucer-like craft stalking and lifting an elk into the air. Now, might this have been connected to the incidents during the summer of 1990? Well, possibly, but, I mean, maybe it's just a separate incident, right? The 2013 Texas sheep mutilation wave. I'll tell you about this, right? We mentioned earlier that according to Kit Menzer, many cattle mutilations take place between the month of June and October. And that was very much the case in Texas during that time period in 2013, right? When multiple sheep mutilations occurred. Sheep mutilations, again, that was in Wales. We spoke about it last week, didn't we? Not only did law enforcement investigate the grim cases, but the UFO organisation MUFON also conducted their own investigation. And what's more, upon doing so, it became clear that the mutilations were too clean to be an animal, with the local sheriff adding that whoever did this knew what they were doing. So the local sheriff is saying, whoever did it, they had surgical expertise, right? But that's common through all of this, isn't it? These cattle mutilations, no matter where you do it, no matter where you see it, no matter what part of the world it is, they tend to be surgically removed. And then we will go back. It cannot be one organisation doing it. So who is it? Well, you'll just never know, will you? Now, however, the two investigating teams differed somewhat on who they believed to be responsible for the mutilations. Now, while law enforcement believe firmly that the work was that of humans, because they've got to, most likely in the form of a satanic group. Now, we've been through this before. I don't think it's a satanic group. It's too clever, right? MUFON, perhaps, understandably, believed there could be a possible extraterrestrial connection. And the same, MUFON would do that, wouldn't they? They would assume that. They are UFOs. They're into UFOs, right? Whoever was responsible for the attacks, these animals fell victim to them, suffered the consequences. One particular family, the Dags, would see over 20 of their herd mutilated during the apparent wave of attacks, and each was almost identical, with the unfortunate sheep having been drained of blood, while also suffering very medical-type cuts to the face area. Now, like many other cases, no blood was ever present on the ground, and no footprints or other markings were discovered either. What always freaks me out about it, all right? The blood and the lack of tracks. Now, this takes us to the case of the fallen cow mutilation case of Nebraska, a particularly intriguing and bizarre case that unfolded in 2013 when a rancher in Nebraska, Alex Peterson, discovered one of his cattle dead with its head firmly wedged in the ground. Now, when he examined the cow, he discovered that there was a distinct lack of earth in its mouth and nostril, which, had the animal have forced its head into the ground of its own accord, there should have been. So if the animal stuffed his own head in the ground, he would have had dirt in his mouth and his nose, right? Doesn't make sense. So what stuffed the animal's head in there? Now, combined with the death of the incident, Peterson concluded that the cow must have been dropped to the ground from a vehicle unknown. And while many would automatically jump to a UFO connection, which there are very well could be, we should perhaps remind ourselves that black military helicopters are often seen in the same location and the same time as such mutilations. This could also be a possibility here, couldn't it? But what are the government up to, and why are they using black op helicopters? Now, this wasn't the first of his cattle that Peterson had discovered on his ranch. Having discovered 3 of his cows with extremely medically precise cuts to their bodies. The 3rd cow was actually still alive when he found it, and while he would ultimately have to put the poor creature down, he did attempt to perform tests on it to see if there was any details or chemicals were left behind after the attack that had seemingly only just taken place. Unfortunately, these tests didn't yield any results, so he didn't find any weird chemicals or anything like we have found on the other ones. Now, with body parts precisely removed in more recent times, in the fall of 2019, another chilling case of cattle mutilation unfolded, one that left not one drop of blood in the unfortunate bovine. In October of that year, on the Silvies Valley Ranch in Oregon, the vice president of the establishment, a Colby Marshall, discovered one of his cattle dead with body parts precisely removed and completely drained of blood. And this is a reoccurring theme, isn't it, really? This was the fifth of his bulls to fall victim to whatever brute but surgically precise forces were behind these attacks in less than half a year. So this was the fifth of his bulls that was attacked in half a year. What's scary, isn't it, right? On this occasion, when showing the remains of the most recent victim of his herd to a local media platform, the unfortunate bull was reported to look like a giant deflated plush toy. What's more, as well as having been drained of all its blood, the tongue and genitals were surgically cut out. Again, a theme, isn't it? It sounds like we're just repeating ourselves, doesn't it? What was also noticed was there was a distinct lack of predatory scavengers anywhere near the carcass. This is an intriguing detail that often surfaces in other reports of cattle mutilation. Just what are buzzards and coyotes, for example, that would happily feed on almost any carcass they come upon? Why are they not picking up from what are they picking up from these mutilated cattle that makes them keep their distance and decline the chance of a free meal? Is it that thing or that chemical that euthanises them? Do you know what I mean? That makes them go to sleep. Could it be that chemical that they can smell that puts them off? Now, although Marshall, the ranch workers and the local county sheriff are at loss as to what might be systematically snaring and killing cattle from their herd, they have eliminated many possibilities. For example, they are certain that it isn't bears, it isn't wolves, cougars, or poisonous plants. Furthermore, there were no signs that the cattle had been shot to death, by rustlers, I suppose, before the precise medical procedures were carried out. So whatever is behind the attacks, it is very much a concern for those at the ranch in question. You would be very, very scared, wouldn't you? I know I would, right? Indeed, the problem appears to be so concerning to those who work the ranch that they began to patrol the region in pairs and always ensured they were armed. Well, you would, wouldn't you, right? And it is easy to understand their concern. As Marshall himself stated, whatever could take down a 2,000-pound bull would have no problem dealing with a 180-pound cowboy. And that is something you really, really have to consider, right? Now, other cases from around the world, because it is systematically everywhere. Now, while the above locations certainly experienced the majority of cattle mutilation, Colorado, America, that sort of thing, the fact is almost anywhere where cattle is kept, there are mutilation cases to examine. We know, for example, that Australia sees many cases of cattle mutilation, because all you really hear about is the American ones, don't you? What I was chatting about last week, I didn't know it happened in the UK. Right, in September 2018, for example, in Queensland, farmer Mick and Judy Cook would make the grim discovery of a dead cow that had been quite obviously a subject of mutilation. Not only were its ears and tongue cleanly removed, but its entire udder was also missing. What makes it's scary stuff, right? Mick Cook would state to ABC News that it was like the tongue had been surgically removed, adding that he would struggle to do as neat a job with a very sharp knife. Furthermore, despite the obvious injuries, there was no sign of blood anywhere at the scene. Again, a common theme. Nor any sign of struggle. Again, a common theme. They're being knocked out, aren't they? What further perplexed the cooks was that the parts that had been removed were just not something you would use. Now, as much as that sounds horrible, that you would use, I think they mean they're not sellable cuts that you would sell to a butcher, right? That's how I'm getting that, right? Now, perhaps making the situation more unnerving, when he and his wife travelled a little further onto his land, they discovered another dead cow, although this one appeared to have been dead for some time. However, it still appeared to have the same bizarre injuries as the first, more recently killed cow. So tongue missing, that sort of stuff, surgical stuff, no blood, right? The cooks would further reveal that they had made similar discoveries of mutilated cattle in the same area and in the same manner around 10 years ago. All right, although they thought it was a truly bizarre discovery, they kept the incident to themselves. However, when they made their most recent discovery, they decided to make an official report. All right, so they'd had enough, kept the first one secret, come across the second one, got to report it. While sceptical investigators into Australian cattle mutilation often point to coyotes and even the Tasmanian devil as likely being responsible for the attacks, other researchers correctly point out that this doesn't explain the medically precise cuts, as well as the lack of blood at the respective scenes. Right, so what do you think then? The cattle mutilation thing. I don't like talking about it. Makes me uncomfortable. All right, same as really alien abductions. Missing people. Thousands go missing every year. Don't really want to ponder on that, but I thought we did need to cover cattle mutilation because we were talking about Linda Moulton-Howe, right? And Linda Moulton-Howe is a fantastic person and she's doing a great deal of stuff for the UFO scene. So what do you think of cattle mutilation? I know we spoke about the UK ones last week, so I thought I would just finish off covering a few American ones. It seems to be worldwide. It still goes on today, and it's very scary, and people don't know what's going on. They still don't know. Do you think it's government? And if it is government, why are they doing it? Like we covered last week, if the government were really responsible, my gut feeling is that they would either buy and steal the animal, right? Buy or steal the animal, take it to federal land and do whatever they needed to do with it in secret. I can't see them risking being spotted in black op helicopters picking up and dropping off sheep, because helicopters are quite loud, aren't they? Even if they go incognito and they've got no lights on, they're still quite loud. So look, what do you think anyway? I don't want to think it's UFOs because that lends to a whole new side of the UFO scene that I'm uncomfortable with. Now, I generally don't think they're all invaders. Like, at the same time, I don't think they're all peace and loving. Apparently there's over 82 different species, apparently, and I'm not gonna poo-poo that because I just don't know. If you think about it, humans, us, we're scumbags. We are scumbags, right? Humans, there are loads of different types of us, aren't there? There's loads of different types. So if you imagine if you go into space and you go to different planets, multitude of different species out there, all have ulterior motives, don't they? It could be anything from with food, with sport. Imagine if UFOs are nicking cows' tongues, face, livers, uteruses, whatever they want to nick, and it's a delicacy somewhere. You just don't know, do you? It's very scary. Anywho, this was the Tinfoil Hat Fan Club, and the reason we're talking about cattle mutilation, because it is a conspiracy. It really does happen, though. All right, and it is a tinfoil thing. So this is the Tinfoil Hat Fan Club. Please like, subscribe, and ding that notification bell. And I will catch you on the next one. And the next time, let's lighten the mood a little bit, shall we? Let's talk about something else that doesn't involve drained blood, mutilated cattle, and missing faces. That would be fantastic. All right, I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you.